You know, some people accuse me of talking too much in these videos. You know, hurry up and get to the point. But, you know, sometimes in order to really understand the point, you have to give background. You have to explain where you're coming from to really illustrate. And so I have to do that in this case. So there was a time in my life when I loved being a mechanic. I loved working on cars, motorcycles, anything. I would work on anything, anywhere, anytime, for anybody. The money was nice, the money was always good, but that's not why I did it. I did it because I loved working on cars. And this was like from the time I was like 15, 16 years old, even earlier than that. But, you know, full time. I started doing it full time when I was 16. And it was my life. I loved it. And it gave me options. So through the course of my life, I always had my toolbox. I always had customers. I always had constant flow of money, income through auto repair. So it allowed me to do all sorts of things. I was a magazine writer. I did magazines for years. But I was able to get into the magazine business, not really caring if I succeeded or not, because I could always go back and fix cars, always get back to my repair business. Then I went nitro racing. I did the nitro thing for a dozen years, bouncing from funny cars to top fuel alters, nostalgia cars, and all this other stuff. But I was able to do it because back home I had my toolbox and I had customers and I could just do whatever I had to do, but always go back and pick up where I left off, pay my bills as a mechanic, right? Auto repair. Coffee houses, I had a bunch of coffee houses. And I was able to do that because, you know what, if it didn't work out, great. I just turned some wrenches, keep going. And through the course of my life, I've had several shops. Always, I just loved what I was doing. I loved working on cars. But things changed, okay? You know, as you went through the decades, things changed. In the 70s, oh, it was paradise. I mean, we're talking about some very simple, basic analog machinery to work with. And in the 80s and into the 90s, the technology kept coming and coming and coming. And you know what? I actually enjoyed staying on top of the technology. I was cool with it, you know, learning new techniques, learning new things, new equipment. It was fine. A little frustrating at times, but it was fine. I stayed on top of it as part of the challenge. And then things started to change. Cars started to become more and more difficult to work on. And in the early 2000s, I was like, you know what? This isn't really cutting it anymore. And it was in my mind now that if I had to, I could return to fixing cars. I could always make a living fixing cars, but it wasn't something I really relished doing anymore. Now we're 2024, okay? And we're far, far removed from the 1970s. And I look at it now and I say, you know what? It's not possible to make a living fixing cars anymore, at least the way you used to. Now, back in my day when I first got started, when you got a return, when you fixed a car for somebody and it came back to you, this was a crisis, okay? This was a crisis. It was like you didn't sleep at night until you solved this problem. When there was a problem, customer, you fixed a car for somebody, they paid you, they took off, and then let's say it comes back 2 days later, 3 days later, you were apologetic up and down the pike. You would do anything you could. When you fixed the car, you'd actually wash the thing when you were done. It was like that type of thing. It's just like, you know, I'm so sorry I screwed up. This wasn't just me, okay? This was the mentality of being a mechanic, a good mechanic back in those days. You took a return, a comeback as being like, it was a personal thing, right? And it's not like that anymore. In fact, with the state of parts, with the state of affairs as they exist today, I don't really even see how it could be a viable business anymore. Like here I am doing YouTube, and in the past, I would always be like, well, you know, if YouTube doesn't work out, I'll just go back and turn wrenches again, and there you go. It's not possible anymore. It's not possible anymore. Because forget about the technology running amok, and forget about the cars becoming too difficult to service. Even simple things, the simplest things, there's a complication to everything. So where am I going with this? Hurry up and get to the point. I had to say all of this before you could really understand the point. So about a month ago, we got one of our Jeeps up and running, Project Mission Improbable. And we've been working through issues with it, one thing at a time, some electronic issues, computer issues, but multiple issues. Okay, fine, that's fine. Sometimes you have a vehicle that fights you on a few different fronts, and that's to be expected. And sometimes it's even welcomed. It's like, great, more challenges. Let's overcome these challenges. But then you come across something that's just like, how is this even possible? So the situation I had here was, I had a fuel pressure, a fuel problem, starvation. After, let's say, a couple of hard runs with it, running it up through the gears, right, aggressively. Fuel starvation issue. And I put a brand new pump in it. When I bought the pump, I didn't buy the cheapest one. I bought, the one that was a little bit more expensive, name brand, figuring that, well, you know what, I'll probably be okay. Or a better chance than buying the bottom of the barrel one, right? So I put the fuel pump in it, and like I said, it started out fine, and as we're going along, I'm having weirdly fluctuating fuel pressure issues. Now, volume is not a problem. I've got tons of fuel volume, but the pressure is inconsistent. It's not under load. It's not wanting to feed. Okay, so I've got this terminal lean condition. So I'm going through this whole system. I'm looking, double checking, triple checking. I've got good electric connections. There's no variation in any of the feed to the pump, right? And I've got a consistent amount of fuel in the tank. It's not like it's sloshing away or anything like that. What the hell could this be? It's inconsistent. It doesn't. All right, so after I've gone through everything, and I mean everything, I finally pulled the pump back out. Let me see, maybe the sock is clogged with stuff that might have been in the tank or whatever. There's got to be something here. So I pulled the pump out. Pulled the pump out yesterday. And looking things over, the sock's a little, but it's clearly not clogged. That's definitely not the problem. I could hear the motor running, okay? And the motor was getting a consistent 12 volts because I checked it. Why am I having an inconsistent fuel pressure problem? No problem with volume, problem with pressure, and it's not consistent. What is the issue here? Well, I take this assembly apart. I take the sock off, and I go to take the motor out. When I go to take the motor out, the motor just pulls right out of this hose right here, this little hose. Now, there's no barb or anything on the motor. The motor just has its nipple that goes into the hose. But like I said, when I unbolted it, right, see it bolts on with this little nut right here. When I took the nut off, the pump just fell away out of this hose. It was a loose fit, right? And like I said, no barb or anything on the pump to, like, let's say, at least grab onto the clamp area, right? Or, you know what I'm talking about, right? No barb, just it's smooth. So the pump just fell out. The motor just fell out. These are the clamps that were on it, on this piece of rubber right here. These clamps just fell off. You can see I haven't disturbed them at all. These clamps were just basically sitting over the hose. Now, as time went on and the hose started to harden up a little bit from being submerged in the gas, which shouldn't happen. There should be a fuel-resistant hose in there, but evidently this isn't very fuel-resistant because it got hard, or it did something, it contracted, got thinner. The clamp no longer had any grip on it. So what would happen was the pump would pump the fuel. The pump is working fine. The pump would pump the liquid through, fill the lines and everything, and provide enough pressure for low-speed operation. But now when you really got on it, there was enough of a loss, a pressure loss, between the hose and the unbarbed pump that the fuel pressure would just escape here. So I put another piece of hose in there, and I put a couple of screw clamps on it. These things did absolutely nothing. They were just along for the ride. Now, if you had done this for a customer, right? If I had done this for a customer, this would have come back. right? And I would have spent a bunch of time trying to diagnose a really oddball problem. Why does it have inconsistent pressure? It has consistent volume, but why does it have inconsistent pressure when it gets consistent voltage? Who would even think a brand new assembly would have a sloppy fit on the clamps and the feed hose? And this is where your pressure is leaking out from. In the old days, when a parts manufacturer would release a part to the public, they spent time. They had engineers. They put these things through all of the different circumstances that the pump would see over the course of its life. They would spec the right rubber. They would spec the right clamps and the right pressure. All of these things. Nothing was ever taken for granted. Everything was spec'd exactly right. But now, with this like race to the bottom, manufacturing system that we have these days, parts coming from all over the world, just knock this thing off. Don't worry about it. It works fine right now. They'll take it out of the box. It'll work fine. That's all you need to know. Well, now this is what you get. You get parts that simple componentry to it, but there's a gotcha. There's a gotcha. The hose is the wrong type of hose, and the clamps are not sufficient to keep that hose, as it changes slightly, clamped tight to the pump. And the pump doesn't have a barb to at least, give the hose something to grab onto, or give the clamp something to work against. This is a comeback. And you know what? If you had taken this pump, let's say you did this job for a customer, they take it out, they bring it back to you, a week later, 2 weeks later, and it's like, hey, I got to pass somebody, and this thing just falls on its face. You spend the time troubleshooting it, you find that problem. Great, so now you take this pump, you send it back, you're going to get another one exactly the same way. You actually have to scrutinize it to find what the problem was. It's not just a defective pump or a defective assembly. It's a defective process. You see what I'm saying? So unless I actually, and if I didn't take this thing apart and actually see that those clamps were loose, I never would have realized it. You know what I mean? I would have sent this thing back, and they would have sent me another one, and the one that they sent me, the warranty one, would be of the same construction with the same issue. And I'd put it back together again and give it back to the customer, and 2 weeks later they bring it back and say, hey, I still can't get on an on-ramp with this thing. What's going on? Nothing but comebacks. How do you run a business like that? How do you run a business like that? And this is just one, this is a simple pump in a simple vehicle. And you've got this kind of issue. Now, compound that with the current parts, the current generation of parts, because this is for an 1890s vehicle. Now imagine for a 2010, 2015, 2020 vehicle. How does a regular mechanic, how does a repair shop stay in business? This is why people don't want to be mechanics anymore, because as good as you might be, as much effort and as conscientious as you might be, it's little stupid things like this that will make you look like a fool, make you look incompetent, and cost you money. Every time this thing comes back, it's another, how much time on the lift, how much time, right, in the bay, how many hours you're soaking into this thing. Not to mention the customer is mad, and there goes your name. It's death to a small shop. Small shops rely on, that word of mouth, right? The neighborhood word of mouth. This is why small shops are disappearing, because you have no control over the quality of the stuff that they're sending you these days. It's a rough deal. And yeah, here we are, 2024, and I was like, I'm doing YouTube, but I know that I can never go back to fixing cars, because this is the situation that I'm up against. It's a shame. I'll see you tomorrow.